Alice was sitting on the riverbank feeling very bored when she saw a white rabbit run by wearing a waistcoat. The rabbit took out a pocket watch and muttered about being late, which made Alice very curious. She jumped up and ran after the rabbit without thinking twice. Suddenly, she tumbled down a deep hole and the world turned upside down. She fell slowly through the tunnel and past bookshelves and cupboards floating in the air. At last, she landed gently on the ground in a strange hallway with many locked doors. On a little table, she found a tiny key and a bottle that said, "Drink me." When she drank it, she began to shrink smaller and smaller. Alice found a tiny door and peeked through to see a beautiful garden full of talking flowers. But she was too small to reach the key she had left on the table. Then she saw a cake that said, "Eat me," and took a bite. Suddenly, she grew very tall and bumped her head on the ceiling. She cried so much that her tears made a large puddle around her feet. As she shrank again, the room filled with water and she began to swim. In the puddle were many animals also swimming, like the dodo and the mouse. They all agreed to have a race to get dry again. Alice followed the white rabbit into a hallway where he dropped his gloves and fan. She picked them up and began to shrink again as she held the fan. Soon she was small enough to slip through another door. She entered a garden where she met a grumpy caterpillar sitting on a mushroom. The caterpillar asked her lots of questions and told her one side of the mushroom would make her taller and the other side smaller. Alice tried both sides and grew too tall then too short until she got it just right. She walked through the woods and met a smiling Cheshire cat in a tree. The cat said she could visit the Mad Hatter or the March Hare. Alice decided to visit the March Hare's house first and found a very strange tea party. The March Hare, the Mad Hatter, and a sleepy dormouse were drinking tea forever. They asked silly riddles that had no answers and changed seats constantly. Alice grew tired of their nonsense and walked away. She found a garden full of painted roses where playing cards were painting white roses red. The Queen of Hearts arrived and shouted off with their heads to everyone she saw. Alice was not afraid and stood her ground bravely. The Queen invited her to play a game of croquet. The croquet game was wild and confusing, with flamingos as mallets and hedgehogs as balls. The Queen kept shouting and everyone looked nervous. Suddenly, the Cheshire Cat appeared again and floated in the air smiling. He vanished slowly, leaving only his grin behind. Next, Alice met the Mock Turtle and the Griffin, who told long stories about school and strange dances. They danced the lobster quadrille and sang silly songs. Alice listened politely but wanted to go home. The Griffin said the Queen had ordered a trial to begin. At the trial, the Knave of Hearts was accused of stealing tarts. The King of Hearts acted as a judge and the Queen kept shouting. Alice grew taller and taller during the trial. She finally stood up and told them they were just a pack of cards. The cards flew at her like a storm and she covered her face in fright. Then everything vanished and she found herself waking up on the riverbank. The birds were singing and the sun was shining warmly. Alice smiled as she remembered her strange dream. She got up and walked home feeling happy and sleepy. The next day, Alice thought about her dream and wondered if Wonderland was real. She remembered the funny tea party and the talking flowers. She giggled thinking about the grumpy caterpillar. The idea of shrinking and growing still made her laugh. She told her sister about the Queen of Hearts and the flying cards. Her sister smiled and listened kindly. Even though it was just a dream, it felt so real to Alice. She promised herself she would never stop imagining. That night, she looked at the stars and whispered goodnight to Wonderland. She hoped she would visit again in her dreams. The soft wind blew through her window and the moon shone bright. Alice snuggled into bed and closed her eyes with a smile. In Wonderland, a white rabbit checked his watch and looked around. The Mad Hatter poured another cup of tea. The Cheshire Cat's grin floated quietly in the sky. Somewhere a caterpillar asked a butterfly who she was. The Queen of Hearts played croquet with jelly beans and pancakes. The flowers sang lullabies in the moonlight. The Mock Turtle told a story about a dancing whale. The cards danced in circles until they all fell down. In the garden, the roses glowed in gentle colors. The hedgehogs curled into balls and fell asleep. A tea kettle whistled a tiny tune. The moon watched over everything with silver eyes. Alice dreamed of a tree house where time stood still. She floated on a cloud made of candy floss. The Cheshire Cat winked at her from a rainbow. She giggled and drifted through the sky. She flew over hills of jelly and chocolate rivers. A unicorn waved to her with a ribbon in its mane. The stars twinkled with stories in their light. Everything felt safe and full of wonder. She landed in a forest made of books and pillows. The pages whispered secrets as she passed. A clock ticked backwards and made her laugh. The dream wrapped around her like a cozy blanket. Alice met a talking moonbeam who offered her a ride. They slid across the sky on a glowing ribbon. Down below, the tea party never ended. The music played softly and dreams danced in the air. She reached a castle built from marshmallows and dreams. Inside were rooms filled with lullabies and quiet giggles. The beds floated like boats on gentle waves. A music box played her favorite tune. Alice found a door shaped like a heart and stepped inside. It led to a garden where night never ended. Fireflies lit the paths with their tiny glow. She followed them to a big storybook on a hill. The book opened by itself and showed her memories. She saw herself shrinking and growing again and again. She remembered the silly riddles and the races. The laughter echoed through the pages. She curled up beside the book and listened to its voice. It told her tales of curious girls and brave dreams. The stars leaned in to hear the ending. A lullaby carried her deeper into sleep. A feather floated down and brushed her cheek. It carried a wish from the Queen of Hearts. The wish said never stop dreaming and always be curious. Alice smiled in her sleep and whispered thank you. The wind blew gently through the trees of her dream. The sun peeked over the horizon of Wonderland. Alice stretched and yawned in her dream bed. Her adventure was ending, but the magic stayed. She opened her eyes and saw the morning light. The birds were singing a gentle song. She sat up slowly and hugged her pillow tight. Wonderland was gone, but still in her heart. She got dressed and looked out the window smiling. The sky was blue and the world felt bright. She whispered goodbye to the characters she loved. Then she skipped off to begin a new day. The White Rabbit waved from behind a flower. The Cheshire Cat gave her one last grin. The Mad Hatter tipped his hat with a wink. And the Queen of Hearts whispered, "Dream on, dear girl."